So in the first video, I just went over a list of basic esoteric symbolism that is evident throughout ancient cultures. And I also clipped in a couple of different lecture bits from Alan Watts, who has talked about the yin and yang. I'm going to go over that list of themes. I mainly want to focus on the ancient rulers, but just to give people an idea of how this yin and yang theme can work with modern rulers, I'll give some examples towards the end of the video as well. And I think I'll go ahead. I have a couple of other wheels that I was going to give examples that are actually more basic than this. So I think I probably should have went in a different order, but we'll just wing it and see how it goes. So we have the self here, that I have written right here. And then obviously the polarity here is Venus. Obviously the Venus sign has been attributed towards women and the Mars sign has been attributed towards men. Then we move on to the second house here, ruled by Taurus, and also the co-ruler of Venus. So Taurus they're quite materialistic. That's the whole archetype of Taurus. So sustainability is obviously a huge theme with Taurus. So then we move on to the third house here. The third house is ruled by Gemini, which is one of the signs attributed to Mercury. And if you have watched, I believe, can't remember, I think it might be my symbolism of arc video. I went on about how the vertical cross for actually one of my other videos is supposed to be the ascension of man to the gods. And this horizon line is supposed to be the distinguished earth plane, or the ecliptic. So that's essentially what the esoteric meaning for the sign, the cross is. And then you have the circle, and it's obviously the cardinal cross and the zodiac wheel. So when you look at the sign for Mercury, obviously the cross represents that. The circle, and then with the cross, represents man. And then when you add the arc itself, it's supposed to hold the soul. So it's man's direct connection to the gods. Because the polarity of this house here, as you can see, is the ninth house. The ninth house is ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter is attributed to God. Anyway, so then we move on to the fourth house here. The fourth house is ruled by the moon. And in older translated texts for religious doctrine, the moon is actually supposed to represent sin. So, as I was talking about my list that I went from self to others, sustainability to survival, man to God, sin to Satan. So, the moon has to do with our habitual behavior. We're doing something that feels good to us, but it inherently is supposed to be sin. Then the person that we usually have to answer to for our sins is Satan, which is the 10th house. And so that is attributed to Satan, Saturn. Also, that's where the fear of the Saturn return comes into play, because the 10th house is attributed towards accountability. So that is one of the main things that Saturn is known for, is being an authoritarian. So then we move on to the 5th house, which is the house of Leo. It is represented by the sun. So another symbol for that is life. That is reiterated throughout holy scriptures in the Bible, as well as through ancient cultures such as Egyptian culture with Ra, the sun god. And then we look at the polarity up here. The polarity is the 11th house of Aquarius. And in ancient astrology, Aquarius is represented by Saturn as well. So when some people have gotten a little confused about some symbolism with Father Time or with Satan as being attributed to Saturn, it's because of the dual nature. So this Saturn here that rules the 10th house has to do with Satan. This Saturn that is the polarity of the life house, which is the 5th house, represents death. So this is the Grim Reaper, and this also is associated with Father Time. So life usually has a lifespan, and also the 5th house has been attributed to spirit in some translations too. So spirit and death. So this is the dual nature process of the recycling of your spirit and life and reincarnation. So then we move on to the 6th house here. And as Mercury down here, the 3rd house, was had man as the theme, this one will also have a similar theme. So instead of it just being man, this is the limitations of man. People have been taking their body for granted will start to manifest through this house. That's why a lot of disease and health issues are attributed to this house. Your life cycle within this lifetime has obvious limitations. The polarity of this is the 12th house. So see, as we use the word limitations of man, we use the polarity of that. So limitless potential of spirit. So if this is man, this is spirit. Because as we've seen too with the Mercury sign, what I was trying to show you earlier, is this is, the cross represents the connection to man and God, and then the circle usually represents a spirit of some kind, and the arc itself is supposed to represent the vessel that the spirit is in. So you can see in all of its components, it does represent man's connection to the heavens. So even if we wanted to humor the concept of the new rulers, there's Neptune, Pluto, and Uranus. Looking at the polarity between the 5th house and the 11th house with the current modern ruler, Uranus, the 5th house has to do with pleasure and leisure. And so the polarity of pleasure would be pain, trauma, suffering, which falls right in line with the modern translation for a trauma signature. And also, too, another polarity I didn't even think about. Leo would represent that creative side, and Aquarius would represent the analytical, scientific side. So they have the potential of being in the genius spectrum, and actually some people would probably interject and say, well, I know quite a few Leos, especially famous Leos, that have contributed to some substantial intellectual subjects, and that goes back again to this whole point of this video, the polarity factor. So every single Leo has characteristics of Aquarius, and every Aquarius has characteristics to Leo. So the way that they express their inner Leo spirit would be through the polarity. So in through the 5th house, out through the 11th house. So they would be expressing their creative, independent expression, especially since they like to be leaders, by being pioneers in the scientific field. We look at Mercury in translation to Neptune. This is obviously man, and this is supposed to be source. So you come closer to the end of your life cycle, you start to understand you're going to have to merge back with source. So it's just a growth and maturity process in itself. The 2nd house that is ruled by Taurus, originally I said for the ancient rulers it was sustainability versus survival, and I, for some reason, lost that part of the clip. I apologize for that. So the modern interpretation would actually be success of an individual, contributes a lot to financial astrology. The 8th house is the success of others, so this is collective success and financial stability. That was a bit choppy. I recorded it and then decided to go back and add a little bit more, and yeah, so. But I am going to stretch this into a 3-part video, just because I'll probably end up adding another 5 to 10 minutes. So this was actually the complicated example, but I was using the original list I made in part 1. Then I'm going to go over just some simple down versions with the qualities and the elements throughout the zodiac wheel, which will be a little bit easier for people to digest if they're not familiar with religious esoteric symbolism and or evolutionary astrology in general, or if you're also new to the subject of astrology, the elemental examples will be a little bit easier for you to digest with that as well. So part 3 will be soon, and thank you for watching.